Okay, I mentioned, I did a couple of videos leading up to this, and one of the things, I kept on announcing this as June 30th. And the reason for that is June 30th is 45 years that Joanne and I are officially in the ministry. 45 years ago, we knelt on a platform in a church in Brooklyn, New York, Salem Gospel Tabernacle, and the elders laid hands on us and commissioned us. And that was June 30th. By September 1st, we had packed a truck, and from our small apartment in, what's it called, Sunset Park in Brooklyn. We were up on 5th Avenue, between 5th and 6th Avenue on 47th Street. Packed a truck and moved out here to New Jersey to help plant churches and to share the gospel. It's amazing, 1974. Yeah. So that was the first time we moved to New Jersey. We moved there 3 times. Kind of like a rubber band attached to us. Every time we get away from it, it just pulls us back in. But yeah. So last year at our No Pat Answer seminar, this Saturday, the last Saturday in June, I dealt with navigating a post-truth culture, and it's been one of those subjects that just keeps on pulling you back in again, same kind of thing, where I keep getting deeper and deeper into it. And I say this because it is the philosophical side of apologetics, and I keep on telling people I'm not a philosopher, and I don't have a degree in philosophy. I have studied philosophy more than most people do that don't major in philosophy. My degree, my master's in apologetics, was heavily laden with philosophy. And I use this illustration. I say there are 3 things you never want to get into the weeds with. One of them is golf. Am I right?
Yes.
Yeah. Unless you are what? An expert. Unless you are a pro golfer. You still don't want to get in the weeds, but you can, right? The other one is bass fishing. You never want to get in the weeds, well, you don't want to get in the weeds, again, unless you are a professional bass fisherman. Then you know what to do, because bass know how to tangle your line up and break it when you're fishing for bass. You don't want to get in the weeds. And the third one is philosophy. Because you can get in the weeds in philosophy. But unless you're a philosopher, you really don't want to get in the weeds. There are such nuances in the whole philosophical approach to knowledge that unless you have really spent the hours and the time to do it, I know the high points of philosophy. And to me, the way that I look at that, it's the history of thought. And most people never think about the history of thought. And, you know, how did we get here? How did we get to this place? I mean, how did we get to the place where our headlines read things like this? You know, these are all school shootings or workplace shootings. They're headlines in workplace shootings. When I did a very simple Google search on school shootings or that sort of thing, you know, this is basically what, sorry, I got the wrong thing there. I'll show you at the end that the massive amount of things that are out there is just amazing. That is the massive amount of headlines that are out there. How did we get to that place? How did we get to the place where a young man, predominantly, a young man can pick up a gun, go into school, and just start shooting people? Where does he get that idea that this is something that he could do? Or if you look at what happened was at Virginia Beach, back, was it the first part of June? It was a Friday afternoon, I believe, that a gunman, disgruntled employee, went back in and killed, I don't know how many people, was it 13 people, or shot so many people? Where does that happen? Why does that happen? It's been since Columbine, back in the late 90s, 98, that this has just been exploded into our culture. And the question that you have to ask is why? I grew up in a house with guns. I never had the thought of taking the gun outside of my house, unless my dad was with me and we were going to a place. We used to come to a relative's farm here in South Jersey on the Black Horse Pike that ran still runs between Philadelphia and the Jersey Shore, Atlantic City, I think it is. And one of my mother's uncles owned a farm down there. We would go down there and shoot. I was a kid. I was 7 years old, something like that. I never thought that I should take this gun outside. Most people I know that grew up with guns in their house never had that idea. They never played with guns. But today we have this craziness, and as soon as it happens, I was going to take a clip off of the news where someone says, you know, we've got to ban these guns. No, you're missing the point. You're missing the whole point. You know, it's the same thing like more people die from automobiles every year, but nobody's saying, well, we need to get rid of cars. Because it's not the car that kills, it's the person who's either being absent-minded or texting while they're doing it, or drunk or high or whatever else. They're the ones who do it. The same thing with guns, and this is not a pro-gun speech, it's the person. What's happened to the person? And I said this last year, and I'll say it again, just in case you forgot. We taught them they could do it. We taught them that they could do it. And we didn't have a class on you can go and shoot people if you're angry at them. But the way that we constructed things, and that's what I want to do the first part of this morning, is show you how we got here and look at some of the high points of our culture, or the high points of philosophy, rather, that have produced this in our culture. And we continue to do it. And the argument today is just so prevalent that we think it's normal. We've normalized something that I believe is the root cause of all of this. And I'll say this right up front. That was my theme last year, that every Christian should learn to navigate a post-truth culture because of the immense challenges it presents to the gospel of Jesus Christ. So we could complain about the culture, which is not difficult to do. It's very easy to complain about the culture, especially those of us who were alive and in the 60s and 70s and remember when there was a time when the culture was very different, the ethos was very different. And we've watched or been part of the transition from what we would call a very stable culture to a very unstable culture and a very angry culture in a lot of ways. And some of the things are that we've just let this happen. And here's what we've done. And I'm going to say this up front, and I'm going to pound this until you get it, because I don't think we get it. I don't think you've heard me say it, and most of you here are some of the only people who can give me a definition of truth. But I don't think we love truth and pursue truth and recognize when someone is doing doublespeak or using self-refuting statements and don't call them on it and make people deal with what truth is. And Aristotle said to say what is, and it is, and that it is true. In other words, to say what is, to make a truth claim, and that's actually what it is, that's true. But to say what is and it is not, what's the last part? Is false. And that's very simplified. He said it a lot more, I want to say eloquently or sounding more complicated. But part of our reason is where our culture has gone or where our culture is today, and you have to ask the question, where is it going? But the most important thing that I think for you to learn, let me back up a step, let me ask this. How many of you come to all these seminars? Or the majority of the time? Yeah. Majority of you, good majority. This is basically our core group that comes here. And so I shouldn't have to do a whole lot of recruiting to get you to come back. But there has to be an enacting of what you're learning. There has to be, you have to become what J. Warner Wallace calls a $1 apologist. You know, just someone who takes what you learn, and when you interact with the world, because you learn what the concepts are, that you interact with the world in a way that we're bringing truth back into the world, because as we'll see, that is the one thing that affects everything else that happens to us. That is how we deal with truth. And if we continue on our way, we have no right to complain. It's just like, you know, you complain about who got elected, but you don't vote. You know, you don't have a right to complain if you don't vote. If you're not involved in the political process, you don't have a right. You shouldn't be complaining. And the same thing about knowing this information that we deal with and not using it in a positive way, in a way that really can affect the people that surround us or are with us. Now, I pulled a bunch of cartoons out that one of my relatives sends me. I have a few relatives who are always sending you different jokes. I have relatives on both sides of the political aisle, so I get all kinds of stuff. But these are pretty neutral. But unfortunately, I don't think you could see them very well. It's two kids looking down at a book, and they're saying to it, it's called a book. I can't see where to put the batteries or where the batteries go. And this one, the mom is looking at the kid and says, "Just open it and read it." He said, "You don't have to. Oh, they don't need a password." Some of you have better eyesight than I have. This one says, "No joystick, no mouse, no keyboard. How do you expect me to turn the pages?" A little bit of humor, but it just shows you this is where our culture has gone. I was talking to one of my daughter's friends just a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about, I remember these girls when they were in high school. And I asked them if I could hang out with them, because every time I see pictures of them together, they're having so much fun. I'm thinking, like, do you let old guys come and hang out? But we were talking about, they're right in that age where it started to shift, where technology was really coming to bear on our culture. They're right in that age group, but they remember reading books where you had to turn pages. And then there's one of them who collects first editions, which I caught on late in life. I've got some early editions of some books, but I don't know that they're first editions. And we were so they asked me. They said, "So, you know, what do you do when you read?" And I said, "What do you mean? What do I do?" They said, "Well, do you read a tablet or do you read books? You know, do you actually?" I said, I love the smell of books. If you've seen my study, you would say I like books. That would be an understatement. I like the feel of the turn of the pages. But I do use all the electronic stuff when I'm writing something, because it's so much easier to cut and paste than it is to type out things. It's a little bit shorter when you just can grab something, cut and copy and paste it into your writing. So I do that. But you have to be a reader. You must be a reader, whether it's tablet or the real thing, the book, you know, whether you use Kindle, whether, whatever there's a great website called Scribd, SCRIBD.com. They have books that you can download. Many of them are free. And they have out-of-print books. They have one book that I'll use this morning. I'll use some quotes from this morning that I can't find anywhere in real paperback form. My wife will confess or report this about, I have an addiction for books. I do. I don't know if it's curable. but it is certainly real. Anyway, but you have to be a reader, and you have to read both sides, or all sides of an argument. As painful as that sounds, most of us like to read things that just reinforce what we already believe. We just look, and it's almost like a validation kind of thing, that you want to read things that validate what you believe. But you have to read the other side. That's one of the things that I really thank God for Norm Geisler, who, by the way, has retired fully from public ministry. He's 87 now, I believe, 86 or 87. And I think they finally convinced him it's time to retire. But one of the things he did was he made us read all sides of any argument or any position. And I did that to perhaps more than most people would, just because I also have this insatiable thing to understand something, to get a good grasp of what that thing is. That's why I can defend Peter Singer probably as good as he can defend himself. I stopped reading his stuff, admittedly, probably around 2005 or 2006. I thought I had read enough of his material to understand his position and what he comes. If you don't know who Peter Singer is, I don't even know if he's still the chairperson for the Center of Human Values at Princeton College, Princeton University. But he was for the longest time. He got in there at 1998. Again, I was over in Trenton, pastoring when he took the place, and I was just really getting into apologetics. But I started to read all his material to understand how he could say that it is the right of a parent to terminate the life of a child up until the age of 2. That if a parent doesn't believe that a child is going to benefit society, or that they could not offer that child a life, some of you are shaking your heads. If you could not benefit the life of that child, or the life of that child was not going to benefit society or the culture, then you have the right to take the life, because that child is not a person. It's human, but not a person. Here's the thing. If you start where he starts, you end up where he ends up, because his logic is pretty tight. Yeah. But that came out of me reading. I get people angry at me when I say this. I don't believe that. I don't believe anything that Peter Singer believes. He does have some points about animal cruelty that I do agree with. I think he has a point on some things about animal cruelty. Sidebar. It's really ironic that here's the man who believes that you could take the life of a child up until the age of 2, and yet he is the father of the animal rights movement in America, or in the world. And you think, how do these two things fit together? If you start where he starts, you end up where he ends up. And you understand him. Here's a quote from Josh McDowell. He says, "It's more important to understand than to be understood." That's pretty good. It's more important to understand than to be understood. And this one, I think, is really what takes it to the next level. He says, a problem understood is half solved. Yeah? If you understand the problem, it's half solved. And I scored in the top 5% of mechanical aptitude for the U.S. Air Force. Of all the people who were going in at the time, I scored in the top 5%. Unfortunately, there were a bunch more people who were in the top 4%. And so they put me in what they call crash rescue, which fits right in with the military, you know, just throw this one in there so we know what to do with these guys. Yeah. All right, still have some regrets of that. But yeah, so when I approach things from a mechanical point of view. I want to understand it. If you don't know what's wrong with that engine, all you're going to do is keep on throwing things at it to try to figure out what's wrong, or you do what's called the process of elimination. Today, they have these computers where you plug your car into the computer, which to me, I don't understand. And the thing tells you what's wrong. Tells you what cylinder, what wire. It's amazing. But somebody had to see the need and figure out what the problem is. Okay, so the way that I diagnose this problem is that our culture has shifted from one very stable, if I could say that, philosophical view of reality, but has changed over time and changed to a different philosophical view. Now, who's our target? Who is our target? I would say, first of all, that our target is anybody in our culture, because more people have bought into this idea that there is no such thing as absolute truth, being a post-truth culture, that there are no absolutes. And so there is no absolute right or wrong. There is no absolute good or evil. I covered most of this, if not all of this, last year. But I know when you get information, and I tend to be an information dump, that I can give you all this information, but today what I want to get to is how do we share Jesus in this culture, not just navigate it by understanding it, but actually share Jesus, because I think that's the object should be the object of all of our lives, is that we want to share Jesus in it. Okay, Generation Z. What is Generation Z? Those born between 1995 and 2010. It's a 15-year span. And you know that the sociologists like to classify different generations. So you came from my generation called the baby boomers. Well, there's even one before that they would be those who were born before World War II. Baby boomers are from 1946 to 1964. For the longest time, I think we were the largest group that could be grouped together. There were some 80 million babies born in that time period and became really the driving force. We're what's keeping the drug companies in business today. Yes, that's when someone years ago said invest in pharmaceuticals. They knew what they were talking about, because we're keeping them in business. But 25% of the population today is made up of Generation Z. So there's been another baby boom. Yeah. 25% of the population makes up this Generation Z, born between 1995 and 2010. Pretty amazing. Yeah, here's what identifies my generation. We remember this day. Yeah, know where you were, right? Know exactly what was going on when that happened. The Generation X remembers this part of things, coming down of the wall. I think that's Magic Johnson, who's representing the AIDS epidemic or HIV epidemic, and a couple other things. Here's what Generation Z remembers. It's a whole lot more. A whole lot more things going on. And Sean McDowell has done, his ministry. Sean McDowell is Josh McDowell's son, has a PhD now. He speaks mostly to that generation. Most of what he does speaks to that generation. Most of his research is there. For me, he's the go-to guy when I want to find out things about that generation. He's done more research, read more books, read more articles, and that sort of thing to go into that side of things. So that's that's one of the important things. Okay. How many of you remember me talking about a fact-value dichotomy? 1, 2, 3. Fact-value dichotomy. How many of you were here at the NOPAD? How many remember last June? It's the month that comes after May, and before you get to July, there's this other... That's why we did values clarification. I talked about a fact-value dichotomy. Yeah? Anybody remember this? Yeah? Basically, this is how we got here. Okay, I'm going to try to trace the history of how we got here, in the history of thought. Now, I love the idea, and the more I've done this, and I've talked to Joanne about it, I thought I probably should put together a whole thing about the history of thought and just pick the high points of what happened in the world of philosophy that have affected us. Now, here's another sidebar for you. There are some philosophical thoughts that really impact our culture, or Western culture, because we're talking generally about Western philosophy. Then there are other things that don't impact us very much. And it really depends on the time and the person and their position in the culture and the things that make people in the culture want to know more about that. And so one of the things we had to do when I was doing my master's was trace that history of thought and look at some of the resources that show us that this fact-value dichotomy is one of the most important things that happened. And it happened as a result of the Enlightenment, which I'll talk a little bit about the Enlightenment, and what happened during that period. For some of us, or most of us, when we think about the Enlightenment, you just think about some period of history back there where a bunch of things happened. There was the scientific revolution that happened during the Enlightenment. And the one philosophy that came out of the Enlightenment that really made its impact on the scientific revolution was empiricism. That the idea that all knowledge comes through your senses, and it has to be validated by sensual experience. So you have to either be able to see it, hear it, taste it, touch it, or smell it. It had to be that. That's basically what empiricism is. And it's been around from the classical Greeks. It's been around forever. But the fact-value dichotomy was basically that science discovers facts. And by science, they would include in that math and logic. That those three things would be the things that discover facts. And once those facts are discovered or acknowledged or validated, you could probably refine them. You might see something else come along, but science discovers those facts, and those facts are determined as true. John Dewey picks this up, and he's the one who talks about values clarification, because that's the next part. See, individuals determine values, and values can't be judged. Now, if you looked at those two things just right there, you could understand most of our culture. When you use the word values or you use the word facts, you could determine where we are in our culture and who believes what. Yeah? And that's a departure from some other parts of our culture. This dichotomy has been disputed. No, I don't think I have a slide for this. Anybody remember what I said about this illustration of fact and values? Is that a fact or a value? Can you prove that scientifically? No. Can you prove it logically? No. Mathematically? No. So it itself is a value, which means that it's personal. It means that it can't be judged as true. It's a self-refuting. Yeah, it's part of what we want to learn today, is how to recognize those things. So what's a post-truth culture? How do we get here? And how do we navigate it? How do we get to the place to do this? Okay, you have 5 minutes to read that thing we handed out. Let's do a little thought experiment. 5 minutes. Okay, I pulled this off of the internet. Some of you might recognize it. The names of the guilty and the innocent will be I should have sent this to our folks in South Africa that they could read along with us. This is, okay, time out. I won't charge us against your time. This was a discussion. Okay, this was a response to another claim about a pro-life claim. This was a response to it. Okay, the pro-life claim was obviously talked about the life of an unborn child. This was a response to it. So at least you know this. So I'll give you back that 30 seconds. Okay, you got about another 2 minutes. If you're done, that's fine. Just want to do a little thought experiment here. I tell this to my class in South Africa all the time, talk awkwardly among yourselves. It's a Richard Howeism. They're actually sending me photographs of them sitting around watching the sun. Next best thing to being there, right? Okay, anybody still reading? Got a gist of it? Rereading? Rereading. Yeah. What do you recognize? Anything you recognize in this that would identify with a post-truth culture?
My rights to make my choices.
Say that again?
It talks about rights.
Rights.
Significant issue in this, my rights to make my own choices.
What are the rights toward making your own choices? Yeah. Sorry?
The supremacy of choice.
The supremacy of choice.
Not taking responsibility.
Not taking responsibility. Yeah. One of the things I'll mention this too. I want you to elaborate on something for the folks.
Personal judgment.
Personal judgment, yeah. Amy?
At the bottom of the first paragraph, it says we all adhere to our
Yeah, we all adhere to our internal logic. Subjective. Yeah. Sorry? I think in the context, this reality means being pregnant with a child or with a, yeah. Right. Say that a little louder. Say that a little.
If they're saying every minute of this reality, they're viewing the reality of being pregnant as this.
Right, this reality, this thing.
Sucking the life out of you.
It's taking life from you.
Not
Cause,
giving life. That's the reality. And the perception is the reality is this is taking life from me rather than me giving life.
right,
There's a difference.
right.
The sentence about being a host is very,
That the mother is a host. Yeah,
where's the maternal, the connection, the maternal?
yeah,
Women are nurturers. This is,
right. Just for those, the folks that are watching this on live stream, I gave them a sheet of paper that was a conversation about pro-life, pro-choice, just to illustrate, and I'm not trying to make an argument for pro-life or pro-choice. I want to make the argument for the subjectivity of it. What's one question that is never asked or one statement that's never made about this whole pregnancy idea? Is it human? That never comes into play. It's all about the circumstances that the mother would find itself in. And those are, if we had the time to get into it, those are all anecdotal evidences. They are not factual evidences. They are examples of the condition rather than this is a reason why you have to do whatever you want to do with this. So they're just giving you anecdotal examples. They're not arguing for a position.
Also, it's interesting because you start to read every minute of this reality as something other than yourself, and it almost sounds like a backup for life. And then it stops short. It says something else other than yourself is using your energy, changing your physicality, limiting. Like it's reading
Right, this thing is,
person, it's
sure.
reading of a being, and yet it doesn't conclude with it's a being. It concludes like it's a disease or
Yeah.
a parasite. Right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah, and basically that's the position. And you know, I'd be the first one to say in any of these societal arguments or certainly pro-life and pro-choice, everybody seems to polarize to extremes. There's no question about it. But to me, there's one question that needs to be asked that really flattens the argument out, and that is it human? Are we dealing with a human? Because the argument that a woman could do with her body whatever she wants to do, that's true. You have the right to do whatever you want to do. That is not your body. That thing growing in your womb is not your body, because if it were, you would then have 4 arms, 4 legs, 20 toes, 20 fingers, 2 hearts, 4 lungs, and that never happened. There's another entity there that is not part of your body. And if you understand the physicality of a pregnancy, that even the placenta is not attached, that everything that passes through happens through some miracle of life. But anyway, that's a whole different argument. The point I would want to make out of this is that the argument is basically all centered around me. There is no to say what is and that it is true. And to say what... Yeah, the word life is in quotes, yeah. It's a one-sided argument, there's no question about it. But that was one of the things that I wanted to just do to show you when you read through these things, when you're looking through these things, to look for those things that are not factual. Now, is it a fact that a woman has distress over that? Absolutely. An unwanted pregnancy? Absolutely. That's a reality. But when is it right to take the life of an innocent person? That's the question, or another human being. When is it right to do that? And that's really what has to be answered. And that's something that has to be something that's in our conscience. That's the center of every should be the center of every discussion concerning that. But again, it's getting to that point. And here's the point again. Can we think critically enough to detach ourselves from the emotional side of it and talk about the facts, not the values? Because that thing is filled with value. See? And the position is, you can't argue with my values. Because values can't be judged. So one of the questions that came from South Africa was, could I elaborate more on the fact-value dichotomy? I will get to it and show you a little bit how we got to this place, where there is a separation between facts and values. And our society has bought into this big time. And John Dewey is responsible for what we call values clarification. And let me just say this up front. The way we got here was like you're coming straight down this lane and then wham, you make this left turn. And you're thinking like, wait a minute. The most influential thing, I think I have a slide for it. The most influential thing in the whole Enlightenment period was the ascendancy of human reason to arrive at truth. If there was one thing that you could say categorizes modernism, was the ability for the human mind to arrive at truth through reason. That would be the high point of what we would call, that would be the high point of modernism. That we could arrive at truth by reasoning our way to it. Now, to do that, they excluded revelation. They excluded anything that wasn't natural. See, they basically put God out of the picture, and that no truth comes to you through revelation, but everything has to be put into the mix of human thinking and reason to get to that place. So how do we get to the place where values become the ascendant thing? That's the postmodern period. See, where before science was the arbiter for truth. And you could see how those things run that gamut. And so if I were going to look at two people, one of them would be Immanuel Kant, and the other one would be David Hume. If I were doing a teaching on looking at the history of thought, those two guys have so much to do with it. They're key players in this history of thought during what we call the Enlightenment period. Now, does anybody know what they called the period of philosophy before the Enlightenment? Dark Ages. Yeah. And who gave them the name of the Enlightenment? They did. They saw everything that preceded was in this dark period of thought, which is erroneous in itself. It's a lie in itself. David Hume was a Scottish philosopher, and he was one of the strongest proponents that said that all knowledge begins in sense experience. Immanuel Kant was part of what they called the anti-enlightenment. He basically challenged that, or the counter-enlightenment might be a better way of saying it. He challenged that idea that all knowledge begins in the sense, but he did it in a way that really opened the door for what we call postmodernism today, which has been unseated as a valid philosophy and really disregarded by most philosophers, except a handful, but it has become the mood of our culture. Because you can't tell somebody, I have the truth. If you do, you're arrogant. What you're told is, you have your truth. Yeah, so everybody has an individual idea of what their own truth is. So during the Enlightenment, modernism really ascends as the predominant philosophy. Again, that truth can be arrived at through human reason. That you can arrive at truth through human reason. What's unsaid is that to the exclusion of anything that is supernatural. So you don't get there through revelation. There's no God who basically imposes something on a culture by interacting with it, which is why, what's the name of that other branch of Christianity? Not theism, but deism. God exists, he just kind of like wound up the universe like a clock and then walked away from it, doesn't get involved in it anymore. That's what deism is. And it was the ascendancy of deism. Thomas Jefferson basically was a deist. His Bible that was by his bedside, he cut out every supernatural reference to God acting in mankind from his Bible, had it reprinted and distributed to Native Americans. The only Bible sanctioned by the U.S. government. Yeah. So rationalism ascends there too. Rationalism is this ability to use your mind to come in, but this other one is empiricism. And these two things, they have been the major philosophical thoughts since the classical Greeks. They were called by different things, and they become different things as they proceed through history. But rationalism and empiricism goes all the way back to the ancient Greeks, who really fathered this whole idea of philosophy. What they're all trying to do is get a handle on this thing called reality. That's what they're all trying to do. Life as we know it. What's real, what's unreal. They're all trying to put into words this understanding of reality. And if we ever do a history of thought course or class, we'll look at how this whole thing plays out, where you have somebody like Parmenides who thought that you could, that things were in constant change all the time. Who's the guy who thought that everything could be reduced to numbers? Yeah, no big deal. So basically, these two philosophies do this, okay? They start in the classical world, and they travel through time, and they're developing through time. And what happens is, this guy called Immanuel Kant is where things go a little bit off the charts. Because what Immanuel Kant is known for is that, and he's trying to defend the existence of God, okay? That if you read some of Kant's, it's really, some of his writings are perhaps some of the hardest things to just stick with, because the guy's verbose, he is German, he is precise. They said you could set your clock by his daily walk. That he was so precise that he would leave his house at a certain time, walk at a certain, you could set your clock when he would pass you by, get to this one point, turn around and walk back, did it every day. He was just so exact. But basically, Kant was trying to defend the existence of God, and he developed this idea that he separated reality into two realms. He had what he called the noumena, which was what's real, and phenomena, how you interpret it. But here's what he said. He said, you can't know reality as it is. You can only know it as it appears to you. So you can't know it as it is, but you can only know it as it appears to you. Here's the question. How did he know that? You have to know something about reality to know you can't know it as it is. But this is what philosophers do. They just bring up these conjectures and just throw these things out. So Immanuel Kant, he stands right in the middle there. So basically, he's saying that reality is there, but you can't know it as it is. It's all subjective interpretation of it. And what he's doing right then and there is he is laying the foundation for postmodernism. Postmodernism didn't start in the 1930s in the United States or England. It started in Germany in the late 18th century. And it's been fermenting through the years. A little bit, this is free, no charge for this. The reason why modernism got thrown out as the chief and where postmodernism came in was after World War I. Because the late 19th century, they were doing things that, because of the scientific revolution, they thought, man, we have got it. They had a train that laid its own tracks as it went along. And it's symbolic of the idea of man getting to the place. Imagine that, a train. They had this great exposition in London, and they had a train. Somebody had invented this train that would lay its own tracks as it was going along. Sound like humanity? They actually had this thing that would lay its own tracks. And you see, World War I was the most devastating war that the world had ever seen. Obviously, the First World War. You know, the end of the 19th century, a man called Gatling invented what? Gatling gun. And he invented that thinking that once they see how many people you can kill, they will stop war. Sorry? He invented a machine gun. He thought that it would scare people to think that you could kill this many people this quickly. Enter World War I. Yeah. Where you always, when you listen to things like this, you always have to consider there is a devil involved and God involved. And you got to think, which way do you think man is going to choose? Just read history. It always goes back the other way. Okay. Just heading up to an hour. So the fact-value dichotomy basically starts with David Hume. We don't know that he invented the dichotomy, but he said this. He said, if we take in our hand any volume of divinity or school metaphysics, for instance, let us ask, does it contain any abstract reasoning concerning quantity or number? No. Does it contain an experimental reasoning concerning matter of fact and existence? No. Commit it then to flames, for it can contain nothing but sophistry and illusion. So in other words, if it doesn't prove something mathematically, logically, if it's nothing of sense experience, it's useless. So out of that comes this fact-value dichotomy. So he has things that are called useless. And this, again, high points we're looking at, right? So facts are empirically proven, they're mathematically proven. Those are the things that are there. Those are you can reason your way to the facts. Again, take them through your senses to know that they're there. Values, however, are things like this: philosophy, religion, ethics, morals. You can't prove any of those things. They are all independently, subjectively arrived at. So, again, if you go back, and I think we have the things I taught last year at this time on there to see how these things, so philosophy basically, according to the modernist, it's useless. It's just sophistry. Religion, useless. It's like, and you'll see with the Vienna Circle during the 1900s, group of men called the Vienna Circle. They were, here's the big word for today, they were logical positivists. And one name that you might have heard before is A.J. Ayres, who was one of the British men who were part of the Vienna Circle. Basically said that if you can't prove something scientifically, it's false, or it's not true. Can't be seen as truth. The problem with that is what? you can't prove that statement scientifically. So you see what they continue to do is just use the truth to deny it. It's like banging a nail in with a hammer and saying that hammers don't exist. It's that simple. It's the same thing that they're doing. Okay, let's take a short break.